I, male, 28, am a successful businessman with a few sizable e-commerce brands under my belt. But if you would have asked my parents 10 years ago, they would have laughed at that idea. They've never believed in anything I did, and because of that, I ended up leaving them behind to create my life alone. But the reason I'm writing this post is that my mom and dad, both 54, are trying to get back in my life, and they've ended up causing me a ton of damage professionally in their attempts to do so. I have to mention that my sister Ashley, female 25, is also partly to blame for the way I was treated as a kid since she was the golden child of the family. Ever since she was born, my parents started giving her more and more attention and vice versa for me. I acted out when this happened, and I'm sure I wasn't the best elder brother to my sister. I also struggled academically, which disappointed my parents. When Ashley was in school, she was immediately put in the gifted category, and the school board even pushed for an IQ test. When the results came back, it was pretty much clear that Ashley was a certified genius. This was the last push my parents needed to basically put all their eggs in one basket and stop giving me the time of day. After a while, I was raising myself. I wasn't great at studies, sure, but my mom and dad also never came to any event I was a part of. It hurt because the exact opposite happened to Ashley. They always supported her and took an interest in her life. I had a lot of free time and used to waste it on the internet, but I learned about this thing called drop shipping, which is a pretty low risk side hustle. I got in on the ground floor with this stuff when I was 16 and started making money by being an Amazon seller. It's even bigger now as a side hustle. I was making a serious bank for a kid my age, but I was smart enough to save it and not buy a bunch of useless stuff. I got one of my uncles to help me with my payments, and he was fully on board with my work and used to help out and mentor me whenever he could. At the same time, I also started learning about e-commerce and the world of business and slowly focused more and more on learning through doing and less on my academics. Obviously, my parents didn't get what I was doing, and all they could think of was that my grades were dropping. Ashley was super successful in her own right, and I don't begrudge her for it. But she also had the same kind of concern as my parents that I would end up as a deadbeat. I mean, I didn't get the appeal of having my nose buried in a book 24/7, but I never disrespected her for it, did I? Living at home was just exhausting, and mom and dad were constantly belittling me and comparing me with my sister. I won't say that there was anything super toxic like I've read on the subreddit before, but it was just kind of aggravating. I felt like a burden all the time. The nail in the coffin came when I was 17, after I overheard my parents in the living room. I guess they were discussing college funds and finances for me and Ashley, and Dad said something like, "I don't even think OP wants to go to college. We should just give what we've saved for him to Ashley and make it easier for her when she ends up in college. OP and his business, whatever it is, they're a waste of time. I'll be lucky if he's slinging burgers at McDonald's when he's 30." Now, I know I have painted my parents in a pretty negative light up until now, but I still looked up to them and wanted them to respect me and what I did. When I heard this, I began to spiral and think about how they must belittle and demean me when I'm out of earshot. I never let them know that I had overheard their conversation, but from that day, I decided that I would move out as soon as I turned 18 and spend my adult life becoming successful my way. I had already asked my uncle if he would be okay with me living with him, and I even offered to pay rent. He was living alone and accepted. On my 18th birthday, I broke the news to my parents, and their reaction was just mild. Like, it felt like they didn't care at all. My dad wished me luck, helped me move out, and gave me $300 as a birthday gift. Ashley said that she would come and visit, but I assume she got so bogged down with academics that she never could. We haven't ever met after that point, since I usually don't go to family gatherings when my parents are around. I have met Ashley a few times, and she's looking to get into research in marine biology, which I found to be pretty cool. As I got older, she became more and more chill and friendly with me, a direct consequence of no longer being influenced by my parents. As for how my business is developed, I realized that drop shipping wasn't really going to help me expand in the long term. I got into the DTC brand super early and created a marketplace for eco-friendly kids' toys. My uncle was my first investor, and the business grew and eventually got bought out by a larger company. It helped me net a huge amount of money, like enough to stop working for the rest of my life, but I wasn't done yet. I used that same formula to help a woman in my neighborhood turn her local business into a nationwide brand. And then we managed to sell that for millions too. Even though I never went to college, people began to respect me and my business acumen, to the point where I run a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. During all of this time, my uncle has been my biggest supporter, while my mom and dad have never once reached out to me. That is, until last week. I was at home when my uncle called and told me that my parents had shown up at his doorstep, demanding to see me. They managed to force him to give them my address, and they were on the way to my place at that moment. I was dreading meeting them, but I guess it had to happen. Before long, my mom and dad were on my doorstep, and I reluctantly let them in. They were extremely apologetic and cut right to the chase. My dad said that he recognizes that he wasn't present for me during my teen years, and they didn't try to understand my passions. I listened. But they still didn't know that I had overheard them that day, and that was what influenced my decision to move out. I finally vented and let everything out and said, "Why did you bother coming back for a good-for-nothing son? I don't care that you were going to give my college fund away, but I just needed you to be there for me." After that, there was a tearful reunion where my parents apologized for everything they had said, and I was genuinely considering letting them back into my life. However, when I inquired about their life situation, I instantly backpedaled. Mom and Dad were in some financial trouble. Ashley, although amazing in her field and well respected as an academic, hadn't made it to the point where she had a well-paying position. Dad got laid off recently, and they had been steadily going through their savings. My parents asked if I could loan them some money because the alternative was selling off the house. I felt disgusted that this was the first demand after reconnecting with me. It felt like the only reason they bothered to apologize was so that they could be in my good books. When I refused, Mom and Dad acted hurt and became a bit colder towards me. It escalated, and after a point, I told them that they weren't welcome in my house anymore, and if I saw them here again, I would sue them for trespassing. Well, literally 2 days later, my home security footage picked up a video of my parents banging at my front door while I was at work, and I decided to file a case against them. Dad even knocked over one of my plants as he was leaving. I don't really care about the money, but a lot of my extended relatives are saying appearing in court is going to take an even bigger financial toll on my parents if a fine or community service is placed on them. Even my uncle thinks it's a bit much. AITA for suing them? When they called me after I filed a case, I laughed and just said, "I told you not to come back," and that added fuel to the fire. Update 1. The calls from my family are getting out of hand. Even Ashley texted and said that our parents were forcing her to talk sense into me. She obviously has a better relationship with them than I do, and even though she agrees that they were objectively in the wrong, it would be okay to just drop charges and ensure they never show up at my door again. I do see the sense in that, and hopefully this is enough of a scare that my parents learn their lesson. But I am still undecided on what to do. I'm in a weird emotional space right now because our making up seems so genuine, but I know they were just doing it for the money, and that's messed with me a fair bit. To be honest, the amount they need isn't even a big deal to me, but I can't find it in myself to give it to them. Update 2. After mulling it over even more, I decided that I would drop the lawsuit. However, I have also decided to file a restraining order against my parents to ensure they don't show up at my property without asking me again. I hope that this is a reasonable compromise that gets my family off my back. Update 3. It's been a month since everything went down, and things are quite calm now. I heard from my uncle that my parents are bad-mouthing me to anyone who would listen, and the family is pretty on the fence about the issue. I mean, I don't care about their opinions anyway, but it's nice to know that my uncle sticks up for me and that a chunk of family members also agree that what my parents did was scummy. YTA, but hear me out. You are NTA for filing the lawsuit, not an AH for feeling disrespected by their demands for money. But I feel like you didn't need to gloat when your parents called you, and it would have been better to be more reasonable or hear them out. Basically, saying you reap what you sow is bound to escalate the situation. NTA, your parents are narcissistic and entitled. I'm glad that you have a great relationship with your uncle and can speak with your sister, but your parents are not good for you, OP. I know it is tough to immediately discount what must have felt like genuine remorse, but I can guarantee it only happened because they were in dire need of money. They also basically eked it out of your uncle instead of asking for your consent to meet, too. Next story. I, 20, female, had already filed my taxes when I got a text from my biological father, 45, male, asking if I did my taxes. I was honest and told him that I did and reminded him that he had told me I could claim myself this tax season. He said that he meant for 2023 taxes and then went on to say how he would lose out on $2,000, which he had planned to put towards his upcoming wedding and furnace repair bill. Now, I live in a state where, regardless of how long you live with a parent, if you are 19 and are not a full-time student or full-time worker, your parent you live with cannot claim you. With that out of the way, I was on the phone with my sister, 25, female, while our mom was present with me, fuming. I told him that I'm sorry he's having financial difficulties, but they aren't my responsibility. He then tried to call me. I ignored him because I know what he was about to do. He would not let me talk and would just yell at me through the phone. Yelling or raising of voices are a trigger for my anxiety, so I wanted to avoid going into a panic attack. He texted me to answer my phone and then call me again. I ignored him again. He then sent me a lot of very degrading and hurtful text messages that sent me into a panic and made me feel so shitty about myself. He called me ungrateful and disrespectful, held the fact that he did his job as a parent, home, food, clothes, etc., and said I walk all over people who have helped me achieve my goals. That didn't get me, though. He had asked me to hang out with my brother that weekend and told me to not even bother with coming over. Then he told me we are done and uninvited me to his wedding. Told me that I will not be covered under his health insurance. By the last text, I was sobbing, shaking and struggling to breathe. I have always felt like I had to fight for his love, affection, and time. This happened back in February, and it's almost been an entire month since I have heard from my dad. My nana is on his side and told me I should amend my taxes and ask for some money out of it, but I have a strong feeling that he wouldn't give me anything. While living in his home, I paid him $200 in rent every month and had a lot of housework on my shoulders. Babysat my siblings. I would cancel plans sometimes if they couldn't get my nana to do it, on top of working and school. I got burnt out and moved back in with my mom before Christmas. I don't feel bad about standing my ground, but I'm sad thinking about what he'll potentially miss out on if this continues. He has removed me from Facebook and Instagram. I don't want to reach out because that is what he wants. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole? NTA, sounds like your dad needs to get a grip and not rely on his daughter for a check. His wedding and repair finances are not your problem, and shame on him for putting that pressure on you. An absolute NTA. You might feel bad about losing him now, but it might help you realize how toxic he is. The fact that you already paid him rent monthly on top of babysitting and housework at the age of 19 means that you certainly did more for him than you had to. Good on you for being a nice person and all, but don't let him treat you like a doormat. In a way, the problem took itself out. I don't know your local laws around taxes, but isn't that just a return of the tax that you already paid with your work? It doesn't really matter for this, but if so, then it's a double down on it being yours. Next story. I'm 34, male. My wife, 31, female, and her family, my in-laws, had a 5-day-long family vacation in July. It was an Airbnb that everyone, wife, her siblings, and their spouses, and her parents, stayed in. I happened to have a work trip the same week as the vacation, but it was only 2 days long, so I technically could have gone to the last few days of the vacation. Here's the thing about my wife's family. They're very rowdy. They yell to communicate, get drunk together often, have no respect for each other's privacy, and ask very invasive questions. For example, on our wedding day, my father-in-law asked me if I had been practicing my moves for the wedding night and if I needed any advice. I was appalled. I have told my wife before that sometimes her family can be too rowdy for me, but she gets defensive and says I should accept her family for who they are. There have been times when I've asked my wife if I can skip family reunions and birthday parties, but she gets very mad at me and says it would be super rude to avoid her family. So when I found out that my out-of-state work trip was the same week as the family vacation, I decided to fib my wife a bit. I told my wife that my work trip was 4 days long and that it wouldn't make sense for me to travel to the Airbnb to stay for only one day. My wife agreed to this, so I went on the work trip and enjoyed a few days of peace and quiet at our house, while my wife enjoyed the vacation with her family. A few weeks go by and I'm having some coworkers over for drinks. My wife came home from work early and started chatting with my coworkers. She told them about the wonderful vacation she had with her family a few weeks ago, and my coworkers asked me why I didn't join. I told them that the vacation was during our work trip. My coworkers said our work trip was only 2 days long. Why didn't I catch the end of the family vacation? The look on my wife's face was murderous. After my coworkers left, my wife started yelling at me saying I was a major a-hole. She called her parents and they sent me angry messages saying they couldn't believe I lied to my wife to avoid a vacation with them. AITA for lying to my wife about the length of my work trip, even though I know she wouldn't allow me to skip the family vacation. ESH, lying to your wife isn't good. But I can understand if her family makes you uncomfortable and she didn't give a shit. She was an AH for insisting on you going no matter what, and an even bigger AH for calling her parents and letting them know about it instead of handling it with you privately. She's disloyal and doesn't respect you at all. Time to have a very different discussion and find a compromise you can both live with, or seek marriage counseling so you can have a referee. ESH, you for lying to your wife, period. Your coworkers for being rowdy as well, and having no trouble opening their mouths to bust you to your wife while invited to your house. You used plural, insinuating that they as a group pointed this out to you in front of your wife when she found out. If it was just one of them, I'd chalk it up to one coworker not knowing when to shut up. But they all ganged up on you to bust you to your wife. Sounds planned. Your wife for going off to complain to her parents. Does she have friends? That's their job. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.